UVA and Virginia Tech went to the ACC tournament knowing they'd need to make deep runs to earn NCAA bids. UVA faltered, but the Hokies, they went all the way. They join Richmond, Longwood, and Norfolk State now in the Big Dance. All that and more this week on Teel and Barber. Welcome in to episode 79 of Teel and Barber, Richmond Times-Dispatch and Richmond.com's Virginia Tech, UVA, and ACC sports podcast. I'm Mike Barber, ACC beat writer for the paper, and joining me here, as he always does, the 14-time Sports Writer of the Year and the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, David Teel. David, how are you, my friend?
Good Monday afternoon, Mike. Day after Selection Sunday.
Yeah, it should be. It's kind of like the day after New Year's or the day after any of those where you need the extra day to recover from everything that went down on Selection Sunday. And this year it felt a little extra with the trip to New York, getting back from Brooklyn after covering. You and I were both there in Brooklyn for the ACC tournament. We had the added wrinkle this year of UVA not being part of the NCAA selection, so kind of hanging on until 9 o'clock to see the NIT field. But we did get to spend that week up in Brooklyn. And David, there was a lot of debate, from different media members over whether or not it's a good site for the ACC to rotate the tournament to. I have my thoughts I'll share here in a minute, but what's your take? Is Brooklyn worth having in the rotation?
Every now and then it probably is, Mike, and here's why. It's far-flung for a lot of the ACC base. It is expensive. Those points are duly noted. But as an ACC fundraiser once explained to me about why the tournament was going to Brooklyn, he said it's not about how many people are in the arena. It's who is in the arena. Translation, not just ACC athletic directors, but ACC presidents and their development people. They like to court their New York-based alums and donors. And what better venue to do that courting than college basketball's premier conference tournament? They really like it. Now, whether after 3 times in Brooklyn that has lost its shine, I don't know. I haven't revisited the topic with this particular fundraiser. But I can tell you that is a primary reason this event went to New York.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of some of these football caravans or practices, spring practices that teams take on the road for recruiting, right? They want to be in those kids' area, in those kids' neighborhoods. It's the same thing with your big donors, right? Come to them. Bring your product to them. I like the tournament being there occasionally. I would argue for every 4 years, so that every class, and I know if you're Duke with the one and dones, you don't really have classes anymore, but any 3 or 4 year player has a good shot of getting to play in Brooklyn at least once. I heard from a lot of kids this week from a lot of schools who were from New York and were happy to be home and playing in front of not just family, right? Because at this level, your family probably gets to come to games, but friends, guys you went to high school with, right? The girl maybe you wanted to date in high school, like they pop into the arena when it's in your home city. And I think a lot of kids like that. I thought a lot of players also mentioned guys with no ties to New York who had never been. And they thought it was cool to, be in an NBA arena for sure. But just to be in New York and to experience a little bit of that. And they don't have as much downtime and freedom as maybe people sometimes think. So there isn't a ton of sightseeing getting done. But I think the chance to visit New York and play in an NBA arena is still a really cool thing. Now, I say that all acknowledging that my viewpoint is biased because I want to go to Brooklyn.
You think?
I want to go to Brooklyn every week for the food. I want to go for the pizza. I want to go for the pastrami sandwiches. I want to go for the cheesecake. I want to go for the bagels. In fact, I'm sitting here eating a cream cheese bagel that I smuggled the bagel down from New York in my bag. So my bias is on the food front. David, did you enjoy some of the other aspects of New York aside from the basketball?
Not really. It was cold and windy. It wasn't great for walking, though I trudged to the arena and back every day. I did one morning venture down into Lower Manhattan and met a friend for lunch and had a good meal there. But otherwise, not not really. And I know I joined you and Gene Wong, our friend from the Washington Post, for some New York pizza one day for lunch. But just in terms of wandering around and such, I prefer DC for the ACC tournament. I often tell people the story that in 2016 on semifinal Friday with the games at night, I just went out and walked around and I found myself down by the White House. And all of a sudden I look up in the sky and here comes Marine One landing on the South Lawn to pick up President Obama. And I'm like, I'm not in Greensboro anymore. I mean, to me, it was such a cool moment. You know, I'm there for the tournament, and that evening I'm going to be courtside covering basketball. But I was able just to get out and about, and you stumble into something like that. It was like, dang, this is really, really cool.
Yeah, the only person who comes and goes to Greensboro by helicopter, I believe, is Jim Boeheim, and that's because he wants to get out so quick. So he's got the chopper waiting on the roof there of the Coliseum so he can get out of town. I have no objections to D.C., which, by the way, is also a very good food town. You could just eat at Jose Andres restaurants. I think there's 4 or 5 of them within walking distance of where we usually stay, and have a great meal experience in DC. And Old Ebbitt Grill is one of my 5 favorite restaurants anywhere I've been in this country. So I would not fight you over DC. I'd welcome that trip as well. And but yeah, I think also you're right about the weather in New York. And Gene Wong, who you mentioned, and I and Luke DeCock one day, we did do some kind of just wandering and walking, and that allowed us to experience a little more of the street food culture, which I think is such a great part of New York. Gene and I found some great dumplings and congee in our wandering, and things like that to me make a trip a little extra special. David, it was a very special trip for Virginia Tech and their basketball program. To the victor go the spoils, right? So let's start with the Hokies and their first ever ACC championship. David, going in, I think you and I both felt like this team was playing well. They were clicking. They could make some noise, make a deep run. I think we had mentioned, hey, this is a team that could get hot and go to the finals. I never crossed over the bridge to they could win it all. Did you, or were you pleasantly surprised by just how well the Hokies fared in Brooklyn?
All along, Mike, I liked their bracket when the seedings were finalized. I just thought Notre Dame in the quarters was really a good matchup for Tech. Tech having beaten the Irish in Blacksburg early in the ACC season, and I thought Notre Dame would have trouble defending the Hokies, especially on the perimeter, and that proved to be true as well. The one thing that gave me pause was how Virginia Tech closed the regular season with the loss at Clemson. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm overthinking this, and they're not as good as I think they are. But once they got past Clemson in that immediate rematch, and they were lucky to survive. If Darius Maddox doesn't make that jumper at the horn in overtime, we're not having this conversation. They walk out of New York. They're home Wednesday night. They're in the NIT, and none of this storybook stuff happens. But you're right. It was an incredibly special weekend for this program. And I've had Virginia Tech people tell me they think it's the greatest sports moment in Virginia Tech history. I think it's the greatest basketball moment. I still believe that the regular season finale in 1999 at Lane Stadium to beat Boston College, to assure that the Hokies were going to New Orleans to play Florida State for the national championship. To me, that's the signature moment for Virginia Tech sports. But some Hokie fans I've interacted with, they beg to differ.
Well, I'll say, one, certainly there's the element of recency bias, which I get. I think I side with you, David, because if I think about Virginia Tech athletics,
Football.
I think of 2 names. I think of Frank Beamer, and I think of Michael Vick.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the first 2 names that jump into my head, and both of them were involved in the game that you referenced. Now, I do think in terms of its place in Tech annals and in Tech history, the fact that it was Duke, right, that helps.
Oh, the fact that it was Carolina and then Duke, Mike.
Yep, 3-2-1, not in that order, not in chronological order, but Yeah, the two most storied programs in the ACC, the two blue bloods, Duke, Mike Krzyzewski's final ACC tournament, Virginia Tech's first ever ACC championship. If you made the argument that that was the most significant win in Tech athletics history, I don't think you're off. I don't think you're off your rocker.
No, agreed. And not only did they beat Duke in North Carolina, Mike, you were sitting there right next to me. In the second halves of those games, they owned Duke in North Carolina. They put their foot on the gas, and it was absolutely remarkable. And I was struck, here the Hokies are playing their fourth game in 4 days on Saturday night against a Duke team playing its third in 3. So you would think Duke would have more fuel at the end, but Virginia Tech had far more energy in that second half than Duke did. And to me, that was really impressive.
Yeah, Mike Krzyzewski made that point that he thought his guys looked tired. And David, I wanted to ask him, we ran out of time, but there's physical fatigue, right? You play a bunch of basketball, high-level basketball, you're going to be tired. Your body's going to be tired. Your muscles are tired. I think with Duke, there's a larger element of emotional and mental fatigue. Coach K's last year, the farewell tour, that big show for the Carolina game, which I don't think it was a mistake in terms of that was special, right? That was once in forever that a coach has a run like that in his final game at Cameron. So I had no problem with them doing that. But I do think it's important to recognize that took a toll on the players. Emotionally, mentally, it took a toll. Coming to Brooklyn and the expectation being you're going to win and you're going to send Mike Krzyzewski out with a ACC title, another ACC title. I think that takes its emotional and mental toll. And then getting to the title game, right? You're there. Things haven't been easy. That Syracuse game, you really had to sweat out. You're there. I just think there was an emotional fatigue with that team. And to Virginia Tech's credit, they exploited it by playing great basketball.
They really do. I mean, Hunter Couture on Saturday and 31 points and 7 threes, and Keve Aluma all 4 days. Justin Mutz, his all-around skills, just that blue collar approach that he brings to the game. Mike Bray just raved about him after the quarterfinals. And Darius Maddox, not only to save him against Clemson, but arguably against North Carolina. He scores a career-high 20. He had that 4-point play right in front of us there when things threatened to get a little sideways after that flagrant foul on Couture against R.J. Davis. And just, so many players contributed throughout the run. And in that regard, it's been a microcosm of the Hokies' rise from last place in the league at 2-7 to ACC tournament champions.
Yeah, and I think that you can't overstate what that adds to this story. That they were 0-4 in league play. They were 2-7 in league play. People wrote them off, and rightfully so. I mean, I think we did, right? We got to a point where maybe didn't write them off. Always thought they could rebound and be good, but win the ACC championship, go to the NCAAs with everything that had gone sideways for them. To me, that adds so much to this story, to the character of Mike Young's team, to the leadership of Mike Young, to the leadership of Keve Aluma and Justin Mutz. And you're right. I know the fans got on him. We've talked about this, like, oh, why didn't he play Maddox more early? I think Mike Young brought Darius Maddox along at the right pace, right? Threw just enough at him, got him better, got him ready. And then when they needed him, unleashed him. To me, that was brilliant coaching. Like, the easy thing would be throw the kid into a 20, 25 minute a game role early on, and maybe he swims and maybe he sinks. Mike Young had him ready. Sean Padula for his role had him ready. I think that part of the roster management was masterful this year. I think Mike Young deserves a ton of credit for this team's run. And like you mentioned, so many guys contributed, and I don't mean contributed and got a rebound, made a play. I mean contributed moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like Darius Maddox's shot in overtime against Clay. That's like up there in the all-time of big shots in Tech history, right? If you're going to say that winning that ACC title and beating Duke, well, you can't separate that from Maddox. Mike Young said today on the Zoom with us, right? He said, Darius Maddox doesn't hit that shot, we're coming home Thursday, right? They're on their way home. So I think that's huge. Storm Murphy hit a couple of really big threes in the Carolina game that I think sent the message, like, this isn't a fluke. We've outplayed you. We've got a big lead. You're going to make your run. Well, we're good enough to stop that run. I thought Storm Murphy's shots against Carolina were huge. And then Hunter Couture. I mean, it's almost like underappreciated because of what he did in Tallahassee and against Florida State. But, he's the MVP with just the performance of a lifetime there against Duke and getting them done. And then, the play that I'm going to be writing about later today and that I just remember is Justin Mutz. And he's done, as you mentioned, so much for this team. But his dunk, that two-handed dunk over Paolo Banchero with, I think, about 2:26, 2:27 to go. And he kind of hangs on the rim for a second. He stares down Banchero, who's under him. The players will tell you that was the moment that everybody, and I had fans email me and tweet at me, that was the moment that everybody kind of felt like, hey, the rest of this game, the next 2 minutes, is just a coronation ceremony.
Yeah, I agree with you. And a big part of it is Mike Young.
Mm-hmm.
He is 6-0 now.
Isn't that wild?
In conference tournament finals. 5-0 at Wofford, 1-0 in the ACC. Cat can coach now in a big way. And I was under the mistaken impression, Mike, just having watched a little bit of his Wofford teams, that he really was an offensive guy, that he could X and O on that end of the floor like anybody else in the country. And I kind of just thought, defensively, maybe not. He's getting it done on both ends. They are fierce defenders, especially on the perimeter. I think Couture deserved to be all defensive team in the league. I voted for him. You could make the argument that Justin Mutz did as well. He's a very effective defender on the interior or perimeter. He's so versatile. But the one moment that I remember there in the second half against Duke, where it was getting a little tight and he didn't call timeout. He just calmly stood there on the sideline and held up 5 fingers. And what happened? Storm Murphy just attacked Jeremy Roach off the dribble. Roach was saddled with 4 fouls. Mike Young knew that he'd have to be soft defensively, and Murphy just goes right to the rack and gets a very important layup. I mean, that's coaching, that's trust in your guys, and that's your guys responding to that trust.
Yeah, there's been sort of a knock almost on Mike Young since he's got to Tech that, he's just building a Wofford roster, right? He's building a roster to take Wofford to a title. You got Keve Aluma, who's a transfer from Wofford. Hunter Couture, who was a recruit for him to Wofford and then switched to Tech. Storm Murphy comes over after playing for him at Wofford. I think there's 2 things there, though. I think number one, those guys maybe were a little under-recruited, right? And Mike Young knew not just what they were, but what they were becoming. Now, I think he'll tell you, and I think Keve Aluma has said, I don't think either of them expected him to be first-team all-conference level player, which he's been for the last 2 years. I mean, Keve Aluma's been that good. But they expected, 14-10 from him, that he'd be good. Storm Murphy, he would be a good leader and a good point guard. Some of the big shots, some of the big plays, maybe would that translate? Who knows? But I think those kids deserve a ton of credit, and Mike does too, for trusting them, for developing them. They deserve credit for the way they've developed, and they deserve a lot of credit for, especially Storm Murphy, the moxie that they bring, right? Like maybe there's a little chip on the shoulder of still proving they belong, but I think they're past it. I think they play with the confidence of, yeah, of course we belong, and look what we can do with this opportunity. And then the last thing is what you just talked about. I think Mike Young is a good enough coach to take the kind of guys who aren't McDonald's All-Americans. They're not one and dones, but they're good, solid players. They fit his system. They develop and get better over the years. And I think Mike's in-game X's and O's coaching it's like the sixth man out there. I really like what he's built, and I understand why people had pause with all these Wofford guys coming over, but hey, they just won the school's first ACC championship with all these Wofford guys.
And Mike, that speaks to a couple different things. Southern Conference players are pretty good. There are mid-major guys who transfer up all the time, who then thrive. Carleek Jones, last season at Louisville, right? He came from Radford, and Cat was, first team All ACC. So just because you get guys out of the portal who are not household names, that doesn't mean, look at Jake LaRavia, what he did at Wake Forest this year, coming from Indiana State. So a transfer doesn't have to come from another Power 5 school. And I thought it was really important. And I don't know about you, but I wondered Saturday night, all right, how are they going to handle this? Is the biggest stage any of these young men have been on. Mm-hmm. And what happens right out of the chute? And I'm sitting here looking at my play-by-play. Naheem Aline, 3 off the right wing. Second possession, and this is one I remember. Murphy crossed over Trevor Keels like you could not believe and knocked down a right wing 3. No, right wing 2. Then Couture 3, Couture 3, Murphy 3. It was like 14 points on their first 6 possessions. It's like, you think we're nervous? I think not.
Yeah, that's what I mean about that moxie is they've crossed over from chip on your shoulder only gets you so far, right? Chip on your shoulder only gets you so far. It's great motivation. It's great in the off season. It's great to push you to prove you belong. But when you step on the floor with Duke or with Carolina in the ACC tournament, it's got to be more than chip on your shoulder. It's got to be a real belief that you can do it. And credit to all of those kids and to Mike Young, because you're absolutely right. From the opening tip in both of those games, you got the feeling like this was a heavyweight fight. These were 2 equal combatants, not some kind of David and Goliath story. And everybody loves the David and Goliath story, and you can make the argument because of Duke's talent that that's always going to be what it is. But watching it sitting courtside, it felt more like the heavyweight fight analogy, like they were going to go blow for blow. And then all of a sudden Tech turned it on and Duke was wounded, right? And they were trying to guard their ribs and slump into the ropes and just buy time. And Tech took it to him, and that made it all the more impressive to win in that fashion.
Yeah, and Mike, it was almost as if it was coming full circle, because I remember Virginia Tech's game at Cameron, where I think the final margin was, I forget what the final score was, but it was between 8 and 12 points. But Tech had really competed well against Duke. And I believe this dropped him to 0-2 in the league. This is in late December. And Mike Young's up there at the podium in the press room, and as he's walking out, he encountered Bucky Waters, the old Duke coach. Still sharp as a tack. Bless his heart, he's in his 80s, but he comes to all the Duke games. And Bucky summoned Coach Young over, and Mike has a soft spot for the coaches who have come before him. And Bucky just whispered to him, he goes, I really, really like your team. And Mike looked him in the eye and said, Coach, so do I. We're going to win a lot of games. And I don't think it was lip service. I think Mike Young believed that, and it showed throughout the season, because he kept telling anyone who would listen, it's going to turn. It's going to turn. And maybe he was saying it to convince himself. We'll never know. But eventually it got through, and clearly, if they don't win all 4 of these games, they would not have made the NCAA field, and that's an ACC problem that we can address maybe even a separate podcast. But consider this, Mike. Virginia Tech wins the ACC tournament. They're an 11 seed in the bracket, which matches the lowest seed ever for an ACC champion. NC State was an 11 in 87. Mike Young, as a Southern Conference champion at Wofford in 2019, was a 7 seed. Yeah. How about that?
The ACC has some issues. We're going to get into that a little bit later today. When you think about the selection, you think about who was in, who was out, and the teams that are in, how were they seeded? Where were they sent? We're going to get to that, but certainly by winning in Brooklyn, you took all of the debate, right? All the question, all the anxiety, all the worry out for Virginia Tech. They were in the field for the 2nd straight year. Automatic bid to the NCAAs. David, we got the bracket, as we mentioned, Sunday. They play Texas in a 6-11 game out in Milwaukee. You're going to be there for that. Texas team coached by Chris Beard, who we got a little familiar with there in 2019 in the Final Four. What do you make of this matchup, and what are your initial thoughts on what Tech can do?
I think it's a fairly decent matchup for Virginia Tech, Mike. Now, you have to be careful with momentum and how teams close and putting too much stock into it. But you're looking at a Texas team that's lost its last 3 games, including in the opening, its first game in the Big 12 tournament to TCU. Conversely, the Hokies are off a 4-game run in Brooklyn. So does that, Virginia Tech's going to come in there? I don't know. And I do know that, and as everyone does, that Chris Beard is a defensive master. I mean, he's Tony Bennett level when it comes to scheming defensively, and he'll need to be at his best against Mike Young and the Hokies.
Yeah, I thought UVA point guard Kihei Clark actually said something I really liked to me when we were talking about momentum. And basically, I was asking, does it matter? They had been playing real well at the end of the season. Does momentum matter? And he basically said, heck yeah, momentum matters. Not for all of the stuff that sports writers get caught up in, but what does momentum mean? Momentum means you've been playing pretty damn well.
Yeah.
That's what matters, right? So does it matter that Virginia Tech has won these games? Had they lost a close one somewhere in there? Is that, the deal breaker? His point was, if you're playing at that level where you're winning night in, night out, and for Virginia Tech 4 in a row with that kind of competition, yeah, momentum matters. Sure, you feel good, and sure, you got the juju and all that kind of stuff going, but it means you're playing good basketball, and that's what you need to do. And David, for the week, they played the best basketball in the ACC, which brings us to this week's edition of Take It or Leave It.
Thank you, Mike. After beating the top 3 seeds in Brooklyn, Virginia Tech is the best team in the ACC. Let's start with David.
I'm leaving that one. The best team in the ACC is still the team the Hokies beat Saturday night in Brooklyn. Now, whether Duke is emotionally spent here at the end of Mike Krzyzewski's farewell tour, I do not know. But I do know that squad, when you look at who takes the court, is the most gifted team in the ACC. And when playing its best, the team that beat Gonzaga, the team that beat Kentucky, the team that won the ACC regular season outright, that's the best team.
All right, David, thank you. Mike?
I'm going to go with the Hokies, David, and here's why. Duke is the most talented team. There's no question. Their guys should be able at any moment to break a slump, a dry spell by getting to the basket. They should at any moment be able to clamp down and get a stop. Maybe it's emotional fatigue. Maybe they haven't come together. Maybe one or two of these one and dones are closer to done than they are to their one. Whatever the reason, they haven't really put it all together. They've been very good, but they haven't put it all together the way their talent would indicate they could. North Carolina has a higher ceiling to me than Virginia Tech, right? Like when North Carolina shows up and is playing hard and what they have around Armando Bacot and what he can do to take over a game. But the best team in the ACC, the one that's playing and getting contributions from everybody, the one that is unflappable defensively, playing at, I think, almost a Virginia level defensively, night in, night out, the one with inside scoring and outside punch and guys who can put it on the deck and get to the rim, and the one, as we talked about with Storm Murphy, playing with all that moxie, I think it's Virginia Tech. So yes, it's semantics. Who's the best? Duke is the most talented. The least surprising team, if they won the national title out of this group, would be Duke. But I'm going to go with Virginia Tech as the best team in the ACC because of that word team. I think they're connected. Mike Young used that word. He used the word a couple of weeks ago, get that edge back. They've got their edge. They're playing connected. They don't really, to me, have a weakness. Now that they've developed some depth, that's what we talked about going in. Oh, there was no bench. There's no depth. One injury or one overtime game and they're in trouble. They've developed that. I think Virginia Tech is the best all-around team in the ACC, and I think that's why they hoisted the trophy in Brooklyn. Now, going in, I thought UVA had a better shot maybe to be that team. Obviously, this season didn't go that way in Charlottesville for Tony Bennett and the Cavaliers. They go to Brooklyn, David. They did open with a win. It was an ugly one against Louisville, a 1-point win, but Tony Bennett called it beautiful because they found a way, right? So that's what it's all about. And then came an even uglier loss to Carolina. They set a record for offensive ineptitude in the first half. The offense this year just never found its way. David, what were your takeaways from Virginia kind of going into Brooklyn and now coming out of Brooklyn?
The Louisville game, Mike, almost foreshadowed the quarterfinal against North Carolina. And whereas as soon as the bracket was determined, I liked Virginia Tech's half. Mm-hmm. I thought Virginia's was really suboptimal. In fact, a buddy of mine who's a huge Virginia fan, he DM'd me immediately after Carolina beat Duke at Cameron to sew up the third seed and said, this result is not good. And he was right because Carolina is a bad matchup.
Absolutely.
for UVA. And we saw it at the Dean Dome earlier this season when Armando Bacot went 29-21, if memory serves, the first 2020 game against the Cavs since Tim Duncan a generation ago. And you just got the feeling that, yeah, Virginia's going to get past Louisville, but it's going to be a roadblock against the Tar Heels. What we didn't realize was that roadblock was going to be so incredibly unattractive and unappealing. Yeah, that 13-point first half was that was grim.
Yeah.
I've never seen a game quite like this where one squad shoots 38%. I mean, they're struggling, and they're ahead at halftime by 20. That's what Carolina did. Shot 38% in the first half and went to the locker room up 3 touchdowns. You ever seen anything like that?
Well, David, if you go back, we've seen it with Virginia in their non-conference games.
Oh, okay.
Where their defense, right, not the same thing, not on this stage. This is supposed to be more even. We've seen Virginia do this in some non-conference mismatches where the defense is just stifling. And you're wondering, are they going to get to 20 points at halftime? And then you look up and you realize at the other end, Virginia hasn't been very good offensively, but the defense is just so much. Now, I think Carolina's defense was very good in this game, but Virginia certainly has struggled offensively all year. And like your buddy, I think your buddy was astute to point that out. I thought the second biggest loser when Carolina pounded Duke in Cameron was Virginia. Yeah. Because it would have been a matchup with Miami. Who they've beaten twice. Mm-hmm. That is a good matchup. Miami's a good team. And Miami reached the semifinals. That's a good matchup for Virginia. Carolina, a bad matchup. So, yeah, they didn't get a break. That being said, you got to do more, right? You got to play better than that. And like I said, the offense just never found its way this year. Jaden Gardner was very good. Armon Franklin was very disappointing. Kihei Clark was Kihei Clark, right? He had moments where he could take over. He made some clutch shots, but he's not a dominant scoring point guard. That's not his game. Next up for the Cavaliers is the NIT. And they're actually going to host Mississippi State, even though Mississippi State is the 3rd seed in their bracket. The Bulldogs have some renovation going on at their arena, so Virginia gets to host. David, if you're Tony Bennett, what do you want to get out of playing in the NIT?
Experience, postseason experience, further postseason experience. Some of these guys already have it. What I would present a history lesson to this team, and it would be aimed at those who are coming back. And I would take them back 9 years to 2013 when Virginia finished 11-7 in the ACC, but did not make the NCAA tournament field, went to the NIT, and then the following year, ACC regular season and tournament champion, reached the Sweet 16 in Madison Square Garden against Michigan State. Something like this. It's a disappointment. But it's not, a bottoming out. It's not like you finished in 10th place in the league and you're below 500. You just weren't quite good enough to get into the NCAA bracket. This can be a stepping stone. This can be motivation.
Sounds like you got the makings of a column in your notebook there. But yeah, you're 100% right. I think that if I'm Tony Bennett, and he always talks about, hey, what program in America can better talk about? Sometimes you have a setback, but you can use it to fuel what's coming, right? I mean, UMBC to the national championship, that's never going to be outdone. So for this group, it's like, hey, you get your UMBC light, super light. you had a little bit of a dip. You ended up in the NIT. Go play well. Go get some momentum. Go get some experience and make that part of your journey for what you're going to become. No coach in America sells that message better than Tony Bennett, and no program has more experience with it than Virginia. Go back to when they lost in the Elite Eight, to Syracuse, right? And I'm sitting there courtside booking my plane and hotel for the Final Four, and then it unravels. Those can be moments that derail your program, or they can be moments that push you on and along the way, further. And I think you're right. I think that's what Virginia needs to do with this matchup with Mississippi State. If they get through to potentially the lowest scoring game in NCAA history when they face North Texas, boy, that'll be something to watch, hopefully from afar. But if you can get your way to New York, I think there's some real good experience there, and wind your way through the bracket. It's not the bracket you want to be in, but it's the bracket you find yourself in. Now, Virginia Tech, Longwood, Richmond, Norfolk State, they found their way into the bracket you want to be in, the big dance. David, let's take a look at that. And let's start with those Virginia schools. Richmond had to go out and win the A-10 tournament. Well, that's what they did. And in doing so, knocked Dayton out. Dayton's in the NIT. They can't host because they've got the first 4 games there. Longwood won their conference tournament. Norfolk State won their conference tournament. Virginia Tech won their conference tournament. So that's how the Virginia schools got there this year. Which of those schools do you think can make the deepest run?
Virginia Tech. The other schools just have incredibly difficult draws. I mean, you look at the Spiders, they're getting, you've seen Iowa, we both saw Iowa play Virginia at JPJ in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. The Hawkeyes, Mike, are second in the country in offensive efficiency. They can flat out shoot it. And Keegan Murray is a baller. And I know Richmond could end up being a trendy pick. It's a 12-5 game. The Spiders have such a history of upsets in this tournament, and I think that kind of entices people to pick them in the bracket. I just think that's a mighty difficult first-round game for Chris Mooney's team. And I admire them. I watched a good bit of that championship game yesterday against Davidson. And you talk about 2 guys who can X and O now, and Bob McKillop and Chris Mooney. But just to see those super seniors for the Spiders, Jacob Gilliard and Grant Golden and company, who came back, they thought they were going to be in the bracket in 2020, and then COVID hit. Last season, COVID hit that program harder than most, which kind of derailed their NCAA aspirations. So to see them get that tournament bid, it was really cool. And CBS showed the Mooney family, Chris's wife and their children in the stands as that game was winding down. And they were weeping, Mike. I mean, they were so overcome, first with the tension of the moment, and then the joy.
That's what March is all about, right? That's why we love it so much. And it's been a drought. It's been a while for Richmond and Chris Mooney to get to the NCAA tournament. And, there was a point where it looked like they were either going to be regulars there or he was going to bolt for a bigger job. So a big moment for them. Iowa and Purdue, who we got to see head-to-head there, kind of standing in the way for Richmond and Tech. I think that's tough. We talked about the Texas matchup, but I think you're right. I think the Hokies, I just think the Hokies have the most firepower, right? Yeah. If I ask you of those teams, who's the best team? Well, it's Virginia Tech. So that's why I think, Longwood's going to be interesting because they're such a great story. And, I'm going to go with them to Indianapolis. I'm going to talk to some of their players this week, talk to some guys out there. I know they're going to tell me, hey, we're not just happy to be here, right? We're here to compete. And that's the right attitude. But I hope at the same time, I hope that they're happy to be there because it's super cool and it's a super accomplishment. And Norfolk State too, when you do it, people say, well, somebody's going to win that league. But all the other teams in the league wanted what you have, right? And Longwood has it and Norfolk State has it. So yes, you play to win, and no, you're not satisfied just to be there, but please be happy to be there because it's a tremendous accomplishment.
Oh, 100%. And they have all the pressure too. Those are 1-bid leagues. And both Norfolk State and Longwood won those regular seasons. And now it used to be, what did that get you? Nothing. But at least now, as the regular season champion of a conference that is only going to get one NCAA bid, if you stumble in your league tournament, you are assured of participating in the NIT, which is really, really cool. I'm glad they instituted that. But Norfolk State, poor Spartans, not only do they get the reigning national champion Baylor Bears, they get them in Fort Worth in their home state, whereas Longwood gets, I think, a pretty respectable seeding as a 14, but then draws, to me, a baffling 3 seed. Tennessee just won the SEC tournament. The SEC is arguably the best league in the country. Tennessee wins that tournament and yet doesn't move up to the 2 line. That, to me, was one of the biggest surprises of the bracket last night. And there the Vols are in Longwood's way.
Yeah, if you look at that, that's a 14-3 game, right? And you go through the bracket. If you just told me, hey, Longwood's going to get a 14 seed, I might be tempted to pick them. You look around at who are some of those other 14-3 games? Texas Tech, that's not the end of the world in a matchup. Going down the bracket, you've got Purdue, who I talked about. I think that's tough, but Tennessee to me is a 2, maybe borderline 1.
Yeah.
That makes it really tough. So just like you said with the 12, you tell me Richmond's a 12, I say, well, let me take a look, because that might be a team I want to pick. And then I look at the 5, and I think that's the second most underseeded team in the bracket in Iowa. So the committee showed some respect there, right? With their numbers, and then they didn't do them a favor with their opponents.
Yeah, really agreed. And one thing about the Hokies half of the draw there, if they can survive Texas, and I think that's a pretty large if. I mean, Texas they're a 6 seed for a reason. Texas beat Kansas this year. Texas knows what, and as we talked about, Chris Beard can really coach them up. But if the Hokies get to that second round, presumably against Purdue, what's Purdue's big issue? Defense. I mean, the Boilermakers are only 100th nationally in defensive efficiency. They had better be careful if they're playing Sunday against Virginia Tech. I think that's a game the Hokies could steal. We'll see.
Yeah, and it's probably what we talk about all the time with the Hokies. They're going to get inside scoring from Aluma and Mutz. They're going to get great defense. Are those 3-pointers falling?
Yeah.
And if they are against a team like Purdue, watch out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that potentially would send Virginia Tech to the East semifinals in Philadelphia against Coach Calipari.
Yeah, that's a Kentucky team that I think a lot of people, including myself, really like.
Yeah.
Hey, the ACC would be thrilled, though. If Tech gets through that far, I think the ACC would be thrilled. The ACC got 5 teams in.
Oof.
David, it's pretty clear it would have been 4 if Tech lost to Duke, right? They weren't going to get that. And of the ones that got in, Notre Dame's in the first 4, right? So the ACC, we went in saying, does the committee look down on the ACC the way maybe the media and the fans have all year? David, I thought the answer was a resounding yes. Wake Forest is out. Tech would have been out. And Notre Dame's playing in the first 4. The committee did not smile, and rightfully so, upon the ACC this year.
Agreed with the rightfully so part. Wake Forest has no beef. You play a non-conference schedule that's ranked in the 340s nationally, and you're a Power 5 school, that's what's going to happen if you're borderline NCAA tournament. Now, I don't fault Steve Forbes for that. Second-year coach, he had no idea what he had on his roster. He had 9 newcomers, this collection of transfers that he was unsure how they would all mesh. It turns out, thanks to him and them, they meshed far better than folks expected, and they became a very good team. But you can't lose your first round NCAA or ACC tournament game to Boston College and expect to make the NCAA tournament. You just can't. So I didn't think Wake Forest got the shaft by any stretch. The crazy thing, Mike, is you look at where the ACC teams were placed. Notre Dame was the runner-up to Duke. Notre Dame was the 2nd seed in the ACC tournament and was one of the last 4 in the NCAA bracket. And the tournament started seeding the field in 1979. This is the first time that only one ACC team has been a top 4 regional seed. Duke is a 2 in the West, opposite Gonzaga. Good luck and Godspeed there to the Blue Devils, even though they beat Gonzaga. But it was a very bleak selection Sunday for a conference that is second to none when it comes to NCAA tournament performance.
Yeah, but you're not getting selected, as you're saying. You're not getting selected off history. You're getting selected off what have you done for me lately. My only objection to the way the committee viewed or handled the ACC, there doesn't seem to be any consistency in my mind with how you finish the season, right? Like Wake Forest probably in, then that bad loss to open the ACC tournament, now they're out. So the ACC tournament really, really mattered for Wake Forest. Virginia Tech finishes the year just on a hot streak, a bender, and you telling me that if that game comes down to the wire with Duke and they don't win it, they're out? There's an inconsistency there in terms of, does it matter what you do in your conference tournament? And I think that needs to be maybe in writing, right? Maybe in stone, kind of hammered out a little more. How important is it? What you do in your conference tournament, how you finish. Certainly getting upset in your conference tournament should throw out a whole year's worth of work. You made the point. Wake Forest, they were iffy already. Yes. Even though the numbers they were iffy already. Virginia Tech, the way you finish. Doesn't throw out a whole year's worth of work, but man, I mean, we're not talking about the last week of the season getting hot. We're talking about the last month and a half. I'd love to see that firmed up a little bit more maybe in the future. David, how about your overall impression of the bracket and not some of this nitpicking that I'm doing with the seeds I don't like and the value, but who do you like? Well, who are some of the teams that either from a high seed you think can get it done or from a low seed that you think can make a run?
Well, first of all, to your point, Mike, about how you close the season, time was when that was important. In fact, a team's record in the last 10 games would be listed on its team sheet that each committee member had on his laptop, his or her laptop. That's no longer the case. In fact, when you look at a team sheet, the games are not even listed in chronological order.
That bothers me.
They are grouped by the 4 quadrants, and you'd have to be Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man to somehow organize those games chronologically in your head. It's impossible. So truly, how you finish the season as opposed to how you began the season, it does not matter right now. And that's just the way that the basketball committee has decided to play this. So unless those team sheets get changed, there's really no way. Now, that doesn't prevent a committee member from saying, hey, guys, look, Virginia Tech has won 12 of its last 14 games here. The Hokies are really playing well. How about we kind of wake up here and notice that? A committee member can certainly say that, but the data point is not in front of them.
But David, you know this. That reminds me of, can I go to the polling station on election day and write in a candidate? Absolutely, I can. And can I have talked to my friends and other voters about? Sure, I can. But if you're not on the ballot, 99% of the time you're not winning. And so that data point to me is not on the ballot. And the thing I don't get is, go on any roster for any college team. You can sort it by jersey number, name, hometown. It seems to me the NCAA ought to be able to put together something where you've got your games broken up by quad, and then you can click on something and say, what order did these come in? So you can see the progression. You can see the trend. You can see a team like Virginia, and I'm not saying that Virginia belonged in the NCAAs this year. They didn't, but you can see their improvement. You can see the hot finish for Virginia Tech. To me, it is a data point. Is it the most important thing? No. But yeah, I have no problem if the committee wants to reward teams that got better throughout the year, because heck, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there would have to be some discussion among the men's basketball committee, the powers that be at the NCAA, Dan Gavitt, maybe just reorganize the team sheets a little bit. Because like you said, how you play at the end of the season, it should not be perhaps the determining factor, but I think it has to be at least one component that you study. You asked earlier, who do I like overall and such. I value guard play and shooting. If you're looking for a team that a double-digit seed that might make a little noise, South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits.
Aren't they fun?
Dude, 44% three-point shooting is a hell of a game. That's what they shoot on the season.
It's insane.
They've played 34 games, and they're shooting 44% from three. And that they draw Providence in the opening round, and Providence had a great season and was especially strong early for a long time there. The Friars were coasting along with 2 losses, but they staggered at the finish, which is why they end up on the 4 line rather than higher. And I looked at that and I just thought to myself, when I fill out my bracket, and that has some potential impact because that's the game opposite Iowa and Richmond. If on the off chance the Spiders upset Iowa, they could be playing South Dakota State in a 12-13 game for the right to get to the Sweet 16 in a presumed matchup with Kansas, top-seeded Kansas.
Yeah, it could be a lot of fun. And I think this is going to be one of those years, at least for me, where the teams from the battle-tested conferences, and I mean this year, the Big Ten and the SEC, I give them I just think they're going to be the cream of the crop. Kentucky's a team I like going into this. I think this is one of those years where they had a bunch of talent and it came together and I think that team looks really good. I think what Calipari's doing there has a chance to be special. But I like, Iowa. I like Purdue. I like Wisconsin. I like these teams that have been through that ringer this year. Maybe because it's a little more wide open and there isn't that one team you're chasing. It just feels like an even fight. And I know what those guys look like in a fight because we've seen them do it for a year.
True. And let's not forget, and I don't have the exact numbers, but every year there is a team that comes out of that first four and then makes some noise. Is it your alma mater? Is it
nice.
Indiana? Is it Notre Dame? Is it Wyoming? One of those four teams is going to turn around and beat someone in the main bracket.
Yeah, I think you're right. And man, if it was just about offense, I think I'd take Notre Dame. But you got to play defense too, and that's been their issue all year. And Rutgers has proven they can beat anybody, right? So
some of their wins are off the hook.
And that's what I mean about being through that Big Ten. You can beat anybody in the Big Ten. You can beat anybody in the country. Now, can you do it how many times in a row to get to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, the Final Four? That becomes the question. But David, I don't have my Final Four done yet. I haven't filled out my bracket. Do you have a feel? How about a national champion? Do you have a feel for who you like going into this thing?
I do. I've liked them all year, and I think they're going to pull a North Carolina. Gonzaga lost last year's national championship game to Baylor. I think will turn around, get back to the Final Four, just like Carolina did after losing to Villanova in 16, came back in 17, and won it all in Phoenix. I think Gonzaga and Mark Few finally cut down the nets.
It would be a great story. You know what would be a great story too? And I know neither of us expect it to happen, but Mike Krzyzewski, right?
Oh my gosh.
Lost the last game at Cameron. That's always going to sting. Lost the last ACC tournament final. That was sort of a missed opportunity for a special moment. Mike Krzyzewski doesn't have anything to prove, right? He doesn't need any more banners, any more trophies, any more rings. But boy, wouldn't it be nice for college basketball? Because I think people get sideways sometimes with Mike Krzyzewski. He's the villain, right? Well, yeah, if you play against him, he's the villain because he wins most of the time. Anybody in that spot becomes the villain. And Duke basketball with Leitner and Grayson Allen, they've played that role of the villain. Mike Krzyzewski has meant so much to college basketball. I think he is gracious with the media. I know people get on him sometimes for some of the back and forth. And he had one in this tournament, right, where I think it was a kid from a college paper was asking him about trying to back down, use Trevor Keels more against Storm Murphy in a post-up situation. And I thought it was entertaining. It kind of went back and forth, so Mike understood what he was saying, and then he sort of tongue-in-cheek thanked him for the advice on how to coach a basketball game. I think Mike Krzyzewski's been great with the media. I think he's been great for the game on and off the court. There's no arguing with his results. There is definitely a part of me that would love to see Duke and Mike Krzyzewski make that Final Four. We can argue about celebrating him all year. It would be cool to celebrate him at a Final Four.
It would be. And Mike, how about that potential second round game in Greenville on Sunday?
Yeah.
Mike Krzyzewski fighting to continue his coaching career against Tom Izzo and Michigan State. Though I'm not convinced Sparty survives Davidson on Friday.
Yeah, Michigan State to me is, you could, without any data points, I don't want to see Tom Izzo in the NCAA tournament, but I think you're right. Like the committee sort of set Duke up to fail there, but they also might have set Michigan State up to fail. And I think Davidson's really good. And I think the A-10 is just and I know that VCU didn't get in, Dayton didn't get in. Those are good teams. Right. Mm-hmm. And they deserve to be in the conversation. I think what happened was fair, the way it shook out. But yeah. I think if you did what Davidson did in the A-10 this year, you were tested. You did battle, and that's definitely one of the games I'm most looking forward to watching. I hope you all are looking forward to some March Madness. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to Teel and Barber on Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your favorite pods. And please consider supporting local journalism with an online subscription to the Times-Dispatch. You can find special promotional offers available at richmond.com. Today's show was produced by Dean Hoffmeyer. Teel and Barber is a podcast of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and richmond.com. For David Teel, I'm Mike Barber. Thanks for listening. Be healthy and safe. Good luck filling out those brackets, and please join David and me again next time.